All right, we're live here with another episode of the Meat Mafia podcast, joined today by Colin Stuckert. Colin, what's going on?
What is up? Happy to be here.
Great.
You guys don't look like your Twitter icons. You guys look like normal dudes.
That's what everyone says, surprisingly, right? You're like, who's on the other side of this account writing all these crazy threads?
It's good. If as long as you keep it consistent, people recognize that.
Yeah. Well, we're pumped to have you on, man. I think I told you this when we had our first call last week. I had a 2-hour drive from San Diego up to Huntington Beach, and I had on the Better Human podcast that you host.
Yeah.
And I think I literally crushed like 45 episodes because
that's awesome.
It's like the way that you scheduled it. It's such good, like digestible clip.
Yeah, short. Yeah.
So it's cool for us because it's like, on one hand, we think our listeners are going to love the fact that you founded this company, Wild Foods. There's a ton of integrity behind the ingredients and the way that you source. And then you've made this transition into the Better Human podcast, talking a lot about stoicism, your life philosophy, cryptocurrency. So there's a number of things that I think that we can talk about. But I think to start, we'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and kind of what led you on your fitness journey to starting Wild Foods initially.
Yeah. I got to keep it short. So I got to think about this. I feel like I've done this 10 times. This may be my 11th time doing this, and I'm supposed to get better each time, but I feel like I get worse. I'm going to just do a timeline. So didn't do well in school, problem with authority. That definitely was an underpinning to be an entrepreneur, do my own thing. Went to community college because didn't know what else to do, because you're supposed to go to college back then. Entrepreneurship wasn't cool. It's cool now, right? And dropped out, just stopped going. Started playing poker. This is during the poker boom. Played professionally for about 2 years. Took every penny I had from poker and a little bit from friends and family. Started a franchise juice bar inside of an LA Fitness. That was my first business. Learned a lot through that. And then about a year later, started a CrossFit gym, an MMA gym with some friends. That was like my real education in entrepreneurship, because that was a very brutal business to run. Business is still alive today, 10 years, still going strong, which I'm proud of, back in Florida. And then I knew I needed to do something bigger. Like, fitness is great, but I saw a lot of people coming into the gym and they want to work hard. They want results, but they didn't necessarily want to put a lot of work into the kitchen and what they were eating. They thought they could kind of out exercise their shitty diets. And that was always like, I became almost a little disillusioned with that. It was like, you can't, it's kind of like a societal misconception, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'll go do CrossFit high intensity and that'll, fix everything. So it's a very fiat mindset. But this was, again, these are all underpinnings to what I'm doing today and how I got here. And then eventually I sold that to the partner, dabbled in some things. I started looking at Texas, even California. I wanted to move west. I'm glad I didn't end up in California, because that would have been bad. And I kind of settled on Texas and just packed up my car, drove here sight unseen, never been. And I was like, okay, this is the place to be. And that's right. Like, on that 20-hour drive, I started kind of percolating Wild Foods and nutrition and supplements. And I remember just one day I was like, what if I had like a food brand? And it's, again, like, your levels of consciousness and awareness, I can kind of track back how they evolve. Because at first, when I was younger, I didn't know like individuals could own businesses. That was a big aha when somebody's like, yeah, that guy owns a car wash. I'm like, what are you talking about? That was like big corporations owned everything around us. I didn't understand this idea of small business at all. And then like that evolved into, I could own my own gym. And that evolved into, well, what if I had like a big brand that was like global? And you just kind of like level up. And I just started. Amazon was taking off at the time, and I started buying away from myself. I got heavily into nutrition. Dave Asprey, butter coffee, got to give him mad credit for getting me into like fasting and all that, right? I think it was really big for the movement. And that led me into a deep obsession into ingredients, right? Like, how is this food made? How are these supplements made? Because I was buying all this stuff, but I didn't know much about where it was made, how the cows were treated. It was shipped halfway around the world. Where was it stored? Did it sit on a tanker across the Atlantic or Pacific for how long? Like, what happened during that? And of course, Asprey was talking about mold a lot. That was a real concern. And I just became obsessed with ingredients and supplements and how they were made. And so I started buying big bags of whey protein, opening it in my small apartment in Austin, whey going everywhere. And I was like, man, maybe some other people will be interested in a very high quality whey protein, because I feel like this was the best I'd ever found. Like, and I still think to this day, it's one of the best products in the world in supplement space. And I started selling on Amazon, $500 that first month. I remember like $550. I was like, holy crap, people bought this. I didn't do anything. I didn't market. I just like put a listing up there. And then the next month, 1,500. The next month was 4,000. And then I hit like 10,000. And then I was like doing 50,000 a month. And I had, of course, expanded a few SKUs. So it was like way a few other things. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm onto something. And then, I just wrote it, and then that was what I was doing. And, we're now like 8 years into still running Wild, learned a shitload along the way. And Carnivore is kind of a recent thing, which we can get into, but I'll kind of pause there. That's like the timeline. I'm probably missing some stuff though.
Colin, take me back to when you're driving that 20-hour ride in your car. You were leaving Florida. So I did something similar. I left Boston to come to Texas sight unseen. And it just kind of brought me back to my experience driving across the country, having these thoughts come to head, really just like, what do you want to do with your life? How are you approaching things? How old were you at the time? And what were some of the things that you were going through and thinking about?
Yeah, I had exited those 2 small businesses, and I had a payment plan with my partner on the gym. I was going to make, it was a little bit of income, but it might've been like $1,500 a month or whatever. Like maybe that pays my rent. So I'm still going into Austin, growing city, with no income, maybe like 10 grand in my pocket, maybe 15. I knew I could call my mom for another 10 or 15 if I needed to. Right. So like technically I had 30K in cash that I could like get me to whatever I was going to do. And I knew it was going to probably be something in business, but that's not a lot of money. Right. And this is like, even before lean startup and like internet and everything, you can leverage technology. Like this was still, you needed capital to do things. But it's weird because I just followed my intuition. I knew that something was there. I knew that it was West because it definitely wasn't in Florida. Sometimes you know what something isn't to find out what it is. I knew I could not stay in Florida. Right. It was the people, nobody had big ideas. I never felt like the community was there. I was pulled somewhere else. Right. And so instead of obsessing about what am I going to do? What's the thing, the business that like, how am I going to make money? It was, I know that I can't stay here. Mm-hmm. That became my driving force. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of people. It's, it's reasoning via negativity or TIVA. I don't forget how Taleb says it, but it's like reasoning by removing, or reasoning by focusing on the things you know for sure that aren't true rather than the things that are true, right? You kind of have to come to truth. And this is also a first principles approach, I feel like, to everything, is like, you focus on what you can know for sure. What are your first principles? And then you build on top of that. Instead, what people do is they take like a problem and there's this hypothetical solution to that problem. Politics is a great example of this. We don't have to get into that, but it's like, unfortunately, school shootings, it's tragic, man. And it's right close to us, right? But it's like, you have that's a real problem. There's lots of solutions. There's also lots of causes. Some of this is cultural, societal, it's a bigger thing. But like the narrative is like, go immediately to gun control. And I'm like, well, how does that work? Because you already have laws and murder is illegal, but people still do it, right? So like, are laws going to stop it? It's like the war on drugs. What did the war on drugs ever do other than make drug dealers in Mexico very, very, very profitable, right? So it's like, you have to go to first principles. Like, what do I know for sure? Well, it's constitutional right. We've got to protect that. Why? Because the biggest threat to us is the government. It's not other people. It's literally the government is the biggest threat to any citizen anywhere. And you can look at throughout history to see this the case.
Yep.
So I knew I could be in Florida. So I had to go. So bam, I go, I get as much cash as I can. I think I brainstorm, whatever. And then the other thing that's a very teachable moment here in retrospect, because in the moment it's hard, but it was like, I now realize how important the struggle is. And this is kind of the duality of life, where if you don't have hardness, you don't know what softness or easy is, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have soft or easy, you don't know what hard is. Everything is connected. It's the Taoist kind of dualistic nature of the universe. And all those really hard times, and I have way more stories, entrepreneurship and city of Austin, food permitting bullshit and all this crap. Like I look back now and I'm like, I'm glad that happened because I know what to appreciate. I know what to value. I know what is, I have all this experience. And so now when I go through our times, I've been through some hard stuff recently with business and like I'm buying the company back and there's like all this stuff. I always remind myself, I'm like, okay, this is painful right now. This is hard right now. Good. I'm telling you, it's a mindset flip. Yeah. And I was thinking about today how our culture is so addicted to comfort that the second something's inconvenient, we're like clawing back to where's our comfort? Where's our easy? But what we should be doing is we should be patient. We should let time do its thing. And we should be appreciating the hard things because that's what gives value to everything else that you appreciate and value in life. And this is why for me, death, losing people that I've cared about is how I remind myself to be in the moment, spend time with your kids, don't get too much FOMO, don't become obsessed with work. Like everything's a balance. It's all about the golden mean. What Aristotle called the golden mean, nature right in the middle. That's where the dose is. That's what perfect is. Whether that's political narrative, whether that's nature, whether that's health, everything is right in the middle. I forgot what the original question was. I veered, but
No,
take me back.
Dude, it was awesome. I mean, I think that like abstract way of thinking, it doesn't land for a lot of people. Like, what do I not want to be doing? Or like, where do I not want to be? Like, that's not how, like, first principles thinking is not how most people approach, like logically getting to at least some path forward. Like, you need to remove the stuff that you know you don't want. And I think that that's just like such a great, it's like how doctors come to a diagnosis. They figure out what it isn't, and then they like work their way down.
Right, because there's infinite possibility.
Right.
Everything is constrained. Biology is constrained. Your body is constrained. It's fighting entropy because it's constrained within your body, and there's certain parameters, whatever. And a point I want to make on that before we move on is when Bezos was asked, Jeff Bezos, he's like, how does Amazon be so innovative, et cetera, or whatever. This is a famous interview. He said, most people ask me what's going to change the next 10 to 20 years. What am I predicting? But what they don't ask is what's not going to change. And what is not going to change is customers always want low prices. They want extremely fast delivery, and they want great service. So Amazon, the entire thesis is that every year we try to get faster with our fulfillment. That's why they spend billions on infrastructure. They're not faster than like UPS and USPS in a lot of cases. They own more planes than UPS, I think the statistic is, because that was one of their core things. This isn't going to change. In 20 years, customers want products, best price, large selection, service, and they want it fast. And so every year they've been building on that rather than trying to be innovative and predict like what's the next new, is it going to be AI, is it going to be this, is it going to be whatever. Like Google, it just like spends billions and billions of dollars on all this pointless shit, right? It's like Amazon's just like, let's just focus on what we know is not going to change. That's our first principle base. And then we can throw out experiments here and there from the profit that our first principles spit off.
The other thing too, Colin, that I feel like comes true in your story is just your ability to take action quickly. Like even just in that drive from Florida to Texas, you're talking about how you're like formulating this idea for some type of a food company that ends up becoming Wild Foods. And you just start buying these bags of like non-denatured whey and decide to start selling it, which is interesting because even Harry and I talk a lot about like the success that we built on Twitter in a few months. And it was literally just like putting the ass in seat and deciding to just start writing Twitter threads. And like, there's no reason why we couldn't have done this a year ago. We just felt the resistance or whatever. And I think a lot to people, there's so many people that are like, oh, I'd love to have a supplement company, where you just had this idea and just decided to say, fuck it, I'm going to just start buying this and selling it online because I see the opportunity. Yeah, it's not really much of a question, but more so just an observation of like your ability to take action comes through.
Yeah, well, I try to, when I'm talking to aspiring entrepreneurs and just coaches, like a lot of people in Austin, very growth minded. They all want to improve and do things. But I used to think a lot of people should be entrepreneurs. I now think that's not the case at all. That's like a huge mindset flip, and we can always talk about that later if you want. But action bias, it doesn't matter what you're doing, an action bias. And actually, this is where first principles come in again, is that in a environment that is constantly changing, which is the universe, right? The sun is going to blow up in 4-5 billion years. It literally is a dying entity, right? That we take for granted because it's there every single day. Earth will, in our solar system, there'll be heat death of maybe even the universe. Everything changes. Everything is chaos, right? And life fights entropy by putting things together and having, order. But even that regresses to disorder, regresses to entropy, which is death for humans. In that environment, what are the first principles that I have to adhere to? And action is one of them, because action change, it kind of go hand in hand, because action creates an effect. That effect gives you feedback. You learn from that feedback. You take more action. You stack. That's all society is. Society is like literally the wheel that was smart, then the steam engine, and then eventually food processing and all the stuff. And we enjoy the benefits of all that on the Zoom call. That all go trace back to the wheel and the steam engine, and are even before that, cooking, right? Our ability to unlock nutrients by cooking. That allowed our brains to grow big, and that allowed us to not have to rely on plants for low quality energy and whatever, which we can get into. It's like, it's fascinating when you really take a deep dive into first principles and just like everything from economics to history to evolution to biology. Change and action, they're kind of the same thing, but that is a first principle for life, right? For you to wake up every day and consume food, that is you fighting entropy. but that's you taking action, right? And then even within that, like as we talk about health, you might do one thing, you might develop habit. It might be good for you in the long run, it might not be good for you. And you have to continually listen to that feedback, see what your body's telling you, listen to what your body, look what your body's doing, right? Take all these feedback cues and adjust and continually find the best optimal way, that golden mean that is going to bring you kind of like longevity, health, and well-being, while not overdoing it in any one direction. Because if you underdo it, there's disrepair. If you overdo it, it's disrepair. Each leads you more to entropy, right? You can kill yourself from drinking too much water, as in that infamous We radio ad where the girl kills herself because she drinks water trying to win some stupid contest, right? You can kill yourself by not going outside and getting vitamin D. Maybe you can kill yourself if you go outside and get a lot of vitamin D, although I don't know, a lot of the sunscreen stuff and a lot of the sun stuff is like a deep rabbit hole I haven't really gone down, but I pretty much think that sunscreen is probably a scam, just like most of the skincare and hair care industry is. But it's like, again, it's like, what's that dose and what are those first principles and action and responding to change? And this is why they say growth mindset is so big too, because a growth mindset, all it means is you're not rigid and dogmatic in your belief system. You don't think you know things. So you're open to receive information, and your environment is pure information and it's always changing. So based on that, like we do a very simple analysis, growth mindset with a bias towards action, receiving information, doing things, receiving more information, and then just not giving up. Like you just keep going. That's how you are not only successful in business and life and relationships, it's how you have successful body, health, happiness, everything. It's all these same first principles that can be applied to any modality or domain.
Colin, so your psychology here and like your way of unpacking things, I think is an incredibly unique one. How much of it was formed or built around your background with poker? Because I think poker is one of those things that it teaches you how to think in bets, but also think logically through like when to play your hand, when to fold. Like there's so many different outcomes that you can have with playing poker. And it's one of those games that just brings strategy to the forefront.
Yeah, for sure. I actually I've seen some really, really natural poker players in my day that are just like, they just have a knack for the game. I don't consider myself that way at all. I had to really work to get to a certain level where, like, it's hard to say because poker is like very subjective in skill, and it's hard to, let me think about this. I didn't feel like I was a natural poker, but I feel like I've always been a natural gamer. So it goes before this. When I was playing computer games, grew up with computer games, we got our first computer. It was like $2,000. And it was like a 200 megahertz processor, like 8 megabytes of RAM. Like computer nerds, you laugh at that, right? I remember taking it apart, putting it back together. And it was really gaming though, and strategy and real-time strategy gaming, to be specific. And even to be more specific, it was Age of Empires 2, Age of Kings. I was one of the top deathmatch players in the world. Probably if I kept playing, like if I went back into the game, because some people still play 20 years later, I can still compete with some of the best players. It's a much smaller game at this point. But that always, like for whatever reason, I love that. I love that kind of gaming. It lended to my intelligence. And then I also, though, developed a lot of skills around that, which I think contribute to my entrepreneurial mindset. And there's some research around this in Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, I think it's called, which is Growth versus Mindset. But there is a connection to gaming, and I don't remember if it was like what the exact mechanism was, but it was something around when you're playing a game and you realize that you lost that game because you didn't do something or you did do something wrong. What it does is it creates very quick feedback loops. Mm-hmm. And the feedback loops is everything, because most people, what they do is they're just blind to feedback loops. They don't pay attention. They don't pay attention to their cues that their shitty lifestyle habits are telling them. They don't pay attention to the cues of their partners that make their comments or their, whatever. They just ignore that. Like the feedback loops and being open to data like that, and then making that come back to you and saying, now I need to do something different. That's really the foundation of everything. I mean, it's my thinking, what I've done in business, it all comes down to that. And I got lucky, whatever combination of nature and nurture was that made it so that when I lost the game, I didn't get mad and like blame other people or say they got lucky. It was like, I'm sure I did that. Like, don't get me wrong. Like sometimes you just get heated and emotional, but it was very much like, I want to play again. And now I want to be better. And I just kept doing that and doing that and doing that and doing that and doing that. And then even now, like in my almost going to be 40 in a couple of years, you still do that. Because like you figure out everything there is about how it used to be, but guess what? That constant, everything changes, right? This is why no Fortune 500 company stays on the S&P for more than I think the record's like 100 years, and even those eventually die out because no company can be innovative always and forever, right? So it was definitely gaming, and then poker added to that. But poker was really the first taste of money management, because then you're like winning and losing money. It's very, very much like entrepreneurship in that way. You got money coming in, you got money going out, and sometimes the money going out, if it's connected to things you do or don't do, that's a very hard emotional burden to bear, which is why eventually I knew I had to get out of it, because it's like, I don't want to go to work and lose 10 grand, you know? Whereas if I go to work today, I can spend 10 grand, I got on an invoice, but like, I'm not really losing it. That's invested in my business. I get the inventory. You still have losses though, and you still take risks and stuff. And so it definitely set me up for being much more emotionally willing to make big, you know, investments and bets and whatever. Like when I have an investment thesis, like, and I have the money, I just do it. I don't even care about the price. I don't pay attention. I have long-term thesis, you know, it's very much helped me in that way. So yes, but it's more gaming and that feedback loop that somehow has made it so that I connected what I did to my results in the game. That if you can cultivate that in yourself for your kids, it's a game changer. And it comes back to extreme ownership, right? You know, Jocko Willink talked about this a lot. Like I had this idea that I call it max truth. It's extreme personal ownership, because only you can control your reality. I mean, only you can control everything in your life. You know, everything you see, think, and feel, anything that you think comes from someone else, or someone else owes you, or someone else this, or the government this, or whatever, you're operating under a failed equation. It doesn't add up. Everything is you, every single thing, right? It's a stoicism. It's if something happens, it's not what happened to you, it's how you respond to it. And people don't really understand this enough in our soft culture, where everyone thinks that they can just have the state take care of them or whatever. Like it's becoming crazy, because this collectivism and this like rely on the nanny state as an idea is just getting everywhere. Now it's in schools, it's in pro-life, pro-choice, like scary times we live in.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, I feel like you've done a couple episodes on that, on the Better Human podcast, where you've actually talked about you are controlling your own reality, and also just reality creation in general. So it sounds like that's been pretty big in your mindset the last few years, or maybe it's been longer, but would love for you to touch on that.
It's an evolution, because what you do is I mean, I was born in the 80s and we had just massive prosperity, you know, like the comforts and the prosperity that even I grew up in, and then computers, like a whole new, you know, a game changer for humanity. Like I grew up through all of that. And I still grew up with all these ideas about like entrepreneurship wasn't cool. Like it wasn't really a thing. I didn't even know it existed. All through college, high school, nobody talked about it. You know, you listen to authority, you go to school, you do what they tell you to do because they're right. Like, why are they right? It doesn't matter. They're right. What they say is what they say, you know? So like, this was even an entirely different paradigm of parenting and just like authority and this and that. And I've always had a very rebellious, iconoclastic perspective. And I got to give my parents massive credit, because my mom, I know, was a pain in the ass, and she always kind of just like let me do my own thing. And I think if she would have tried to control me, it would have pushed me in a bad direction. By her letting me do my own thing, I figured out my own way. I didn't get into drugs. I didn't do anything too crazy. You know, I got arrested a couple of times for some stupid shit, but we all do. I think we all do. I don't know. And it's like, I turned out okay. Right. So all these ideas that society built into me, like I used to think that I remember I was like 13, I was like, I need to be a professional baseball player, because if I'm not rich, I won't be happy. I had this idea as like a 13-year-old. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, because I don't know if I'm gonna become a professional baseball player. Like I'm playing baseball now, but I don't know if I'm good enough. Like, and then I would like have doubt around it. Like it's crazy, the psychological assault on young people. And then this is before social media. Think about that. Like, holy shit. Right. And I think there's a direct correlation to mass shootings and the craziness of the internet and social media, and how it could take you down these deep, dark rabbit holes. It becomes an echo chamber. You know, it's very easy the internet really pulls out the worst parts of human nature, because, and I have a theory in this, there's no physical violence to enforce a certain level of nicety, which there would have been in a hunter-gatherer society. Right. Same thing with, why do men beat women in certain relationships, domestic relationships? Why? Because there's not a tribe. Right? Think about how many other men would step in and be like, okay, you're gonna stop it. Not even just men, women too, you know? And you remove that group setting, which basically kept our ancestors in check. It was fierce egalitarianism. It was everyone's equal. You're not above me, you're not below me. And even bullying is rooted in this. Why do people bully? Because they perceive someone as lower than the status quo. And it's this ugly way of trying to bring them up so that they're not a threat to the group. Because if you're weak, you're a threat to the group. If you're above, you're a threat to the group. right? Why does this collectivism, do people hate the rich? Because they associate that with power and inequality, and everyone has to be equal. This is where you get collectivism, communism, socialism. It's all rooted in the same human desire to keep everything equal. It's a good desire because, yeah, we should keep like equal opportunity for everyone. But if we try to create equal outcome, that's where you get the problems with the state and money and all these different things, right? So it's all rooted in human nature, man. It's like we're literal ape, like as Naval says, don't take yourself too seriously. You're just like an ape with a plan. Like, and then we have 8 billion other of them on the earth. We're all trying to reconcile our differences with, and it's like, no wonder you have what you have. It's actually pretty amazing. We haven't killed ourselves at this point as a species. Like, we're doing pretty good. Even though the news and social media highlight the worst things happening, we are still in the safest time, the most prosperous time, the less childhood mortality time, like the best, most technologically advanced time in the history of planet Earth we are living in right now. So there's way more to be grateful for than there is to be afraid of or worried about.
Yeah, I think a lot about some of the things that are happening in society now, and like how the infrastructure of society is set up, including like the internet, and how it does create a lot of these, I mean, we're still in the early stages of the internet, and like we still haven't seen like a generation on the other side of like coming through like prepubescent age till like their 30s, having been around just like stuck on their screen like during the most vital years of their life, like, you know, growing into an adult. So I find that like somewhat concerning, but also at the same time, like I'm super optimistic about what the future holds, because we've harnessed this power of information being accessible to everyone. And now we're just on the verge of like making it better. Like, I think all these things come in cycles. Like, you're obviously going to go through a down period where like we figure out like how to make this better. But I do think that it needs to be paired with some sort of like more tribal, like local groups and communities that bring the best out of people, so that they're not just stuck on this infinite web of the internet where they can really like lose themselves and not actually have an identity. You're just like someone on the internet who has access to all this information. And I mean, the bullying on the internet for kids is like insane. It's just like one example of the negative stuff. So like, to me, I think there's so much positive to think about with all this, but it's cuts both ways, where, you know, you can clearly
destruction.
Negative. Yeah.
Create all technology displaces, you know, people in power. It displaces incumbents in industry. You know, I'm reading this book called the Why Nations Fail. And it's basically just history of all the different areas around the world, like Ethiopia and Yemen, like these different places that are poor, and then comparing it to places like America and Mexico, and it explores the history of each one, how they came to be, all the way back to, you know, the Spanish coming to South America and completely raping and pillaging and just disaster, and how now, as a direct result of that, it's some of the poorest countries on the planet, right? And of course, Africa's had its problems, whatever. And the theme is very much centered around personal property rights. Like, basically, if you don't have personal property rights and the state doesn't protect those, then nobody will make the investments of capital and time to create prosperity, and it will be in this perpetual state of you know, a few controlling the many and then benefiting themselves at the expense of everyone else. You know, dictators. That's kind of the dictator's playbook. But this is just human nature doing its thing, right? Like, we've been doing this for a very long time, and this is another phase in that evolution. And this is why, again, like when we talk about politics, America has brought the most prosperity to more humans, and that's not just Americans. That's what people don't understand. We export our technology and our innovations that we made happen here because we have strong property rights to the entire world, right? So a place like China, even though it is still communist, but they've opened up their markets a little bit, and as a result, they've had massive prosperity. They steal our technology, their people benefit, right? And I think over time they're going to fail, because you cannot control 1 billion humans, right? Like, it's like over time, the cracks in the edifice will show. So America has done that because of the very foundational Bill of Rights, Constitution, and the idea of personal property rights, right? That is the thing. That's the thing that every country in the world should try to emulate. But what it does is, when you do that, you remove power from the people in charge that want to control the many and that want to benefit themselves, right? Because when citizens are more aware and they have more economic purchasing power, right, they are more able to leave and or elect representatives that will help them have more rights, right? In fact, very fascinating thing to illustrate this is the Black Death or the plague or whatever it was, the big one in the Middle Ages, Dark Ages that wiped out a lot of people. What that did is that gave power to the peasants because it was estimated that 50% of them died. So what it meant is less labor to work the land for the nobles that were just basically treating them as indentured servants, slaves basically. And they're like, I'm not going to do it. And then you had competition come in where they would offer better living conditions and or pay if the peasants would go over there, and then they had to compete. The free market makes everything better because it reduces prices down and it creates prosperity for all, and it makes everyone happier and better and more prosperous. And the more the state gets involved, the more the state suppresses free markets.
And it sounds like actually understanding the history and picking up patterns in human nature has been pretty core to your philosophy too, correct?
The ancestral mindset is what the podcast used to be called, because the idea is that if you understand human nature from an ancestral perspective, you go all the way back as far as you can, right? And you really observe human nature that way, and you try to think about it from first principles, it explains everything. It goes all the way up to politics. It goes all the way up to, like, you know, as you mentioned, Bitcoin, to money and the state controlling money, and how that is like literal a parasitically poisonous relationship as a base layer of society, and how so much of everything from wars to the petrodollar to all the crap that you see is a result of the state being able to print money at will, to fund things that are to whatever end they want. Whether it works or not doesn't matter, because we'll just make more money. Schools don't have to have any kind of standards, so you get incumbent principals and teachers that are there for life, right? Which creates lower quality of service for the children. It creates all these other political divides and political incentives, and it creates fundamentally moral hazard, which is the reason that when the state goes in to do something, like whether it was banning assault rifles or whatever it is, whatever the new thing is, when the state comes in to do something, and I'm telling you, you can see this, a lot of times they create more of the thing happening and all these other unintended consequences. So as a first principle for me, as a anarcho-capitalist anarchist, basically, I believe that more state is never the answer. But maybe you could convince me of a libertarian idea of a state if it just protected personal property rights, because that really is the foundation of society, right? That's a very good debate to be had. But anything above that, you will never convince me is better, because a state cannot operate in a way that is conducive, because they don't have feedback mechanisms. They have no skin in the game whatsoever. And like Tallow wrote a book about this, right? It doesn't work. And then the idea like, oh, we'll do socialism right this time, right? Or like, they just didn't know. They were too early in the 1950s. They didn't know, right? Like, oh, it just hurts my head when I think about how much history and data and common sense can you ignore just to keep on believing what you want to believe. That is the power of human dogma and bias, which again, you understand if you understand human nature, because it protected the group. And we can talk about that if you want, but basically we have biases and we have dogmas and we have all these things because group cohesion was you needed to think the same. If you thought differently, and the experienced hunter said, don't go over there, it's dangerous, or there's predators around here, whatever. And then you start leading a tribe of your people and children into that area, and then you all get eaten. You are a threat to survival of everyone, because also in a group is any one member of that group, woman for child rearing or men for hunting. Any one of those members of your group that dies puts the entire group at risk. Less people, less resource accumulation, right? So you had to have very, very strong set of beliefs. You had to have groupthink. You had to think exactly like we have myths, we have stories, like everything about human nature, everything that we like in the modern age is exactly correlated to Mother Nature saying, okay, we have these Homo sapiens sapiens. How are we going to get them to survive in nature and then procreate and have these babies with these big heads where their brains are so big and they are the most defenseless animal in nature outside of the womb? A lot of people don't realize that humans are, because we had a group to protect and to be able to make that happen. And as our brains got bigger, what did we get better at? Hunting, organizing. Eventually we created money and commerce and all these things. And human evolution at the same time is also a cultural and societal and technological evolution. Because if you go back to, like, I think Homo sapien is the origin is wise man. And there was also something related to like tool use. Maybe that was another Homo hominid that one of the, like our ancestors that kind of broke off, one of the names is related to tool use or something, right? Because fire and hunting tools, and some theories have slings, even our ability to throw rocks, were integral to kind of like making that leap to going from scavengers, where we would kind of like find a kill and take that what was left, to being able to like actually actively go out and hunt mammoths. As we got more nutrition, brains got bigger, group size got bigger, hunting prowess got stronger, and then bam, like everything from there is just like up.
How important is the skin in the game concept? Because when I think about how people should organize themselves, I think like skin in the game is essential. And like you could cut that in a million different ways, like communism versus democracy. Like I think about it as like, if we're all hopping on a ship together to go cross the sea, like we all have equal amounts of skin in the game because we're all trying to get to the other side equally as much. And so like you need to pull your own weight in that instance. But like in everyday society, it's not like that, right? So the skin in the game aspect, whether you're looking at it through business or government or your own personal life, like having that ownership and skin in the game is key. It's like, it is the bedrock. It's like you're saying the property rights ownership in the US and how that just has created so much prosperity. Owning part of the mission, I think is critical, like, or owning part of whatever you're about to do, and having that skin in the game is almost it's the natural law putting into effect, like, hey, you own some of this, like you have ownership in this, you need to be contributing to it.
Yeah, it's everything. Like
Yeah.
it's such a first principle something funny. I mean, I have so many examples, as you were saying, that I have the one example of selling half my company, having employees basically make the decisions for it. And again, employees get a paycheck regardless of what happens. Them keeping me out of the day-to-day decisions so that I couldn't make the decisions needed to be made and to ask the questions that needed to be made. So it resulted in literally, I don't want to say a number, but a massive write-off from that group, because they let employees do things that the entrepreneur that has skin in the game is supposed to do. An employee will never, ever allocate capital the way an entrepreneur does, ever. That will never happen, which is why, like we said, the Fortune 500, why do most companies that are founded by, like, let's say the Steve Jobs of the world or the Jeff Bezos, after those founders leave the company, it's a decline, right? Because it's not the same kind of skin in the game anymore.
Right.
The founder, it's their baby. They love it. They breathe it. Every penny that you spend or waste or whatever, they feel it internally. Even if they're already a billionaire, it's still a different psychological paradigm to operate under from something that you like might have like a percent of a stake in. Like if you have like stock options at Amazon or whatever, it's just too big to even matter, right? Whereas for someone like Bezos, or Musk is a great example, where most of his net worth is in his companies, right? If Musk leaves and I own stock in these companies, I would divest myself, you know? So that's like a good example. And then like the example of the employees spending money and like a huge loss because of that, them not including me. I could have made all these decisions. I'm like, why do you just ask me? This would have been an obvious no. The other thing is, there was a political example. I mean, basically politicians, what they do is, democracy is kind of a ruse, where it's this idea that, oh, every 4 years we'll vote, right? And you'll represent my interest because I'll vote for those that do. But when someone is in office, if they don't carry out what they promised during a campaign, what happens?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
There is absolutely nothing that happens to them. If you send children, 18-year-olds, to go die in some war, what happens? If you accidentally drone strike some kids in Syria, what happens to you? Absolutely nothing. And it's like the worst parts of human nature on display when you don't have skin in the game. You don't see it. You're kind of removed from it. Like I don't say it's easy, but it's easier to slaughter millions in a Holocaust, or like Stalin did in Russia, and starve them to death, when you're like sitting in the Kremlin, just like, oh yeah, let's just do this, do that, whatever. And you send your cronies out and you're not doing it yourself, right? There's like still like a primal thing where if you see people starving in front of your eyes, right, it triggers a primal response that I think is in every human. I don't care if you think like Hitler or Stalin or Mao were like the most evil people ever. They're still humans, and they're going to still have certain things. Like I'm reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and this might be controversial to say, but I think a lot of the demonizing of Hitler probably should be going towards Stalin and Mao if you do like a comparison take. And I don't know why it is, but Hitler's so covered in America, but you rarely hear anything about Mao, who killed more people, and Stalin that literally starved people to death, like in the most atrocious ways. Whereas Hitler was like trying to be like this megalomaniac, Germany dominates, and he kind of did all these other things on the side. And I think he was kind of a little bit removed from it. He was also very delusional, obviously, because you have to be a megalomaniac, right? And I just think like he probably didn't see a lot of it up close, right? Where with Mao and Stalin, I mean, I got to brush up my history a little bit, but people should look into some of that, like how bad that was. And more people died, like by orders of magnitude than that died in World War II and the Holocaust, right? It's just fascinating. Like when you dive into history, even the things that you think you know, or people think they know, it might not be accurate, right? Or might be a little bit higher than it is, a little bit lower, or way off, right? So I don't know, it's just one of those things.
Yeah. Speaking of history, have you, Colin, done a good amount of just digging into just like these over palatable foods in the processed food industry, and how we've kind of, I know you mentioned fiat mindset, just have like adopted this fiat food system?
Let me think about this. I think this is one of those examples of you can know everything. Actually, okay, so food, here's a good one. Okay, so all of the nutrition recommendations from the state, funded by Big Pharma, Big Food, whatever, right? All of that is based on epidemiology, which is scientists, researchers, quote unquote, looking at other papers written by scientists and researchers, quote unquote, and then saying, based on this data, we've had a meta-analysis of 99 studies, blah, blah, and then saying, this is how you should eat based on that, right? This goes all the way back to Ansel Keys, Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Tobbs, if you want to really dig into it. It's all a big, it's amazing how much of modern day food policy can be attributed back to one guy in early politics at the kind of the growth of the military industrial and big food, big pharma complex that is America after World War II, right? This one guy that had political power, he wasn't even a doctor. He wasn't a scientist. He was like a psychologist or something, or maybe he was an epidemiologist. He might've been an epidemiologist. Don't quote me on that, but it's like so much of him and him bullying and censoring critics of his ideas has led to what we have now, which is a complete and utter clown show, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is nutrition you don't need to be told how to eat by a guy in a lab coat or by the state, right? That's like, think about that a second, kind of weird. You don't, if you go to real food, and of course you can add an ancestral perspective on this, like red meat, more nutrient dense than plants that will literally kill you if you go in nature, try to eat plants, you'll die very quickly, right? Like, so like very simple things like that. Like I can go in nature right now on my camping trip and I can just challenge myself to eat only plants for a few days and let's see how well I do, that plus just buying steaks, testing it. And if you want to go do like a plant-based diet for 30 days, do that, test that, compare your results. It'll be so obvious, right? Like you'll be able to have results within like 5 days of doing this shit, right? It's like self-experimentation. Hello, people. Right? But it's easier to like listen to what some headline said. I don't got to do any work, right? Because again, our modern humans are addicted to comfort. We talked about that. You put all these things together, pull on the threads that make the most sense to you of where you want to like understand. And you can go into the food history if you want. You can go into the political aspect of it if you want. You can go into the boom after World War II and what that did to American society if you want. Or you can just like perform a 30-day self-experiment if you want. Or you can do all of it if you want. I've went into all of it, right? But I diet. And even since going carnivore, I've kind of come to a new place of how I think about food and nutrition. I'm actually a little bit more lax when I eat out and when I do things. Am I still with you guys?
Yeah. You cut out for like 10 seconds, but you're good. You
good.
Just mentioned how you've adopted the carnivore diet, and you said you've kind of taken it a step further. Are you not quite as restrictive anymore? You've introduced some other foods back into the diet. Is that right?
Yes, I'm not hardcore carnivore at all anymore, but this is how I think about it. I think about a carnivore diet with maybe some carbs here and there, fruit, honey, like whatever you want. I think that is probably the apex diet for optimal human performance and health. So in my mind, that's my pinnacle of what I want to do. It doesn't mean I'm always going to do it. Right. And what I've done is I've given myself more grace and just being like, okay with that, So I guess we can take that wherever you want, but like, I went to Carnivore strict. I'm convinced it's the best from all the reasons. I've tried it. I understand the ancestral reasons why. I understand how broken the food system is. I understand all the fiat research around nutrition and all that dogma. It's all complete and utter bullshit, right? And I've come to this conclusion that like that is the apex best way to eat for like I've heard people say they're sensitive to beef. I still think it's bullshit. I think over time they overcome that. So like in my mind, this is a first principled approach. Now, when I diverge from that or I come back from that, that is conscious and I'm aware of that. And I think for most people, that's where you want to be. You want to know what the idea of perfection is as a first principle, but that doesn't mean that you're going to hang out there every day. Some people do. I give massive credit for, some of the influencers, Saldino, even Liver King, though I know beef's not the only thing he's eating.
Yeah.
So it's like, but that's not where I want to be, And so I'm always kind of striving for that as an idea, like, yes, but what I've come since then is that what I've learned from the pandemic is that I would rather eat at home and eat like some sourdough bread and kind of have more flexibility than eating at restaurants. I think restaurant food and corporation made in a box food is the most important thing you want to avoid. So like, again, reasoning by removing, that is the worst. Home cooked carnivore diet of like organic grass-fed local beef, best. And then where I hang out most of the time is like eating at home and trying to always pull myself towards that end of the spectrum. But if some ice cream comes in every so often, if some sourdough bread comes in, because Alice has been making that, I have absolutely no guilt around it whatsoever. Right. And I think there's even a case to be made where for some people that aren't sensitive, they don't have autoimmune issues, it can be even a positive hormesis, like kind of a positive stress in the body. Right. But again, everyone's different, biology's different. And that's where people like, they get debating about these things. And it's like, just go to the first principles. Corporation food, restaurant food, seed oils, absolutely worst. And then in fact, even sugar is something I've opened up on a little bit, but happy to talk about what you want.
Yeah. One of the things that we try to communicate in as simple as a message as possible is just eat real foods and cook your own food. And like, if you're doing that, you are going to be above 95%. Your health will improve like tenfold. And if you're doing that consistently, your lifestyle will change dramatically.
Yep.
Like you said, like Brett has an amazing story where he cured an autoimmune disease through an elimination diet, carnivore diet. And I got way healthier by going really strict on a carnivore diet. But then you loosen the grip a little bit and you reintroduce things. And then you kind of figure out where your homeostasis is, where your balance is. And then you know where perfect is and where your margins are. And you can live your lifestyle within that bandwidth. You don't need to always be like 100% just eating beef. Like you can give yourself some lax. And I do agree with you on like some of the sugar stuff. It's like, have some fruit, have some honey as like your sweet, if you have like a sweet craving or you're going to go have a good workout. Like there's definitely great aspects of like performance that you can get out of some sugars, but some people like can't really, I think Brett like has more of a sensitivity to it. So you really do need to dive into that self-experimentation mindset. It's like, that is such an important aspect of all this, where people just are looking for somebody else to give them the answer. It's like, go find the answer, like figure it out.
You cannot get the answer. That's actually another thing. And it kind of ties back into the extreme ownership, personal responsibility. You cannot find happiness. You cannot find health. You cannot find meaning outside of yourself. You just can't. It's impossible. You can use things outside of yourself to explore and experiment and think deeply and try and learn, for sure, right? Because we still live in, this reality or the simulation or whatever it is. And there are certain rules of physics and things. And, we put out energy, there's a response that comes back to us, but you will never find an answer to anything that you're searching for outside of yourself in any way. And it's food, nutrition, it's philosophy, it's happiness, it's health, it's meaning, it's relationships. It's how do you want to think about politics? How do you want to vote? Like nothing will be found outside yourself. And what do humans do? Because humans are designed, again, for groupthink, for conformity. We are designed to think like other people. This is why I believe the free market is the most important thing, but there's a reason why that's the case. The free market is the most important thing for bringing humans prosperity and wealth and just betterment, because it allows for the individuals, the innovators, the tinkerers, the iconoclasts to experiment with their ideas and to learn better, more effective ways to do things that then all of humanity benefits from. And when the government comes in to stifle that, what that does is that suppresses technology innovation. It suppresses human flourishing. And we have all the examples in the world to see this, right? And there's it's all the same. If you want to look to some, carnivore influencer on how exactly you should eat, and you think that's going to be a shortcut to doing the work to figure out for yourself, like how you should eat, you're always going to have something missing. There's always going to be a disconnect, right? So you got to take from people what is valuable. It's like Bruce Lee said, it's like take what is useful, discard what is not, and then add what is uniquely your own. It's like that applies to literally everything. And humans, again, they want black or white, they want good or bad, they want tribalism, us versus them. They want simple ideas, people, everything fit into a box of this or that, because that does not make them have to expend a lot of energy thinking. And as we know, thinking is like 20-30% of calorie consumption. We're not incentivized to think in the wild because we had to conserve calories. So we just thought like other people, it was a useful heuristic to saying safe and to saying protected in the group so that we could procreate and raise offspring. Because if you started thinking different from the group, you're not getting mates, you're not getting food, you're going to get kicked out, potentially killed, right? Like just study any modern day hunter gatherers, even some of the rituals they had. There was a guy who used to go around with a club. He was like the resident killer. And if you became old or infirmed and a threat to the group, he would sneak up behind you and club you to death. Like, and every culture has like these different, some had like tribalistic fighting where they would resolve disputes with a fight. And then everyone like kiss and maybe have sex afterwards, like all this crazy shit. This is nature figuring out ways, different ways, because there's a lot of different ways here, because you have groups that are isolated, but there's still fundamental principles that we're designed to think alike. We evolved by hunting and gathering together and then raising fragile offspring. And that group unit is so freaking important for that. Then we introduced economics and money, and the group its importance started going down. And then now today, like we have school shootings, we have depression, opioid abuse. We have all these things that are a result of actually not having community. So I actually think after nutrition, community is the #1 most lacking health risk crisis that nobody's talking about. And that's why, like, even Brian and I we're starting a community center out here in Austin, a place to just like get together, work out, co-work, ice bath, sauna, grill out, and like just hang out all the time. And like, we're going to turn into a business, but the goal is to make money. The goal is to just get people together, because like I could be a billionaire right now and I could be on my private jets and going all over the world, and everywhere I go, what is my money doing to me? It's isolating me from everyone else. So unless I literally buy a group of people to be my community and take them with me, right? Which some people do, like the guy with the beard, I forgot his name. Dan Brazilian, right? At least in that, he's right. He needs to have more bros around, because he can't just have the girls around all the time. But it's like, he at least gets that part right. Like, you can have all the money in the world, but a lot of wealthy people, they actually end up having less children. Like Elon's been talking about this a lot. They have less children, less community. They're more focused on their work and these external things. And it makes someone happy and miserable. Like, you have all the money in the world and you're miserable. Like, what's the point? It makes no sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like there's this social media tribalism that's popped up, but then the actual concept of being in a tribe and a community, we're so devoid of that as a society. I even think about the concept of like, like in a lot of other cultures, that you'll have your elders live with you, or your parents, your grandparents. It's like now it's like, nope, when my mom and dad reaches a certain age, I'm just shipping them out to a nursing home. And it's like, that's just so ass backwards from the way that we're supposed to evolve. So it's like, you saying that was like instinctively what I thought about.
My mom lives with us. And when we tell people that, they kind of like have a negative response. Like, oh, how's that? Or like, it's like, oh my gosh. Right. But you go to other cultures around the world where you have multiple generations in one household. And sometimes that's an economic reason. They just have to do that. It's more economically feasible. But what they're accidentally doing is they're more protecting their mental health. In America, it's the reverse. We have all this economic incentive for everyone to have their own 1-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom house or 2-car garage, and all of the things you got to buy to fill that thing, right? Think about the economic incentive. If you took like 100 million Americans and all the parents moved back in, and maybe even had like siblings living together, whatever, think about what the housing market would do. Like, think about what the furniture market would do, right? There is an economic incentive for people to isolate, buy all this stupid shit we don't need, and then go online trying to satisfy their need for social connection and validation, and then going crazy doing that. And some of them, a lot of men, especially men that are sexually repressed, which we even see this with suicide bombers, they're almost always virgins. They're promised 40 virgins in the afterlife. And these elders manipulate them to basically suicide bomb because they're going to get all these versions. Like, it's crazy, but that's another byproduct and another manipulation of human nature. And that's why when you understand the ancestral mindset, you understand first principles of human nature, you see how society sometimes on purpose and sometimes on accident pushes these buttons to benefit some at the expense of others.
The part about having your parents live with you when you're older is something that's so foreign to people in the US. But
So foreign.
if you lived in, like, COVID hit Italy particularly hard because their elderly were living with a lot of the younger people who are going out and like working.
Yep.
But I think about like aging, and as you get older, like you want your like last few years to be as good as possible. The best way to do that is to be around family and friends and like still be around young people,
and be needed.
Yeah.
And have, and like help and like all these things. Like, in fact, do you know that the highest rate of death, I don't know the highest, like, I don't know the number, but when you retire, you're like some absurd number more likely to die within the next like few years. Like, there's a lot of examples of this. There's this one guy, I remember specifically a story. He was Canada, because they have forced retirement, right? Because again, government getting involved because they got to like do all these things, complete and utter bullshit. He was forced to retire. He loved his job. I don't think he was married. So he's probably like a single dude, right? He had all these kids that loved him. He loved being there. It was his passion. It was his purpose. It was his meaning. Within like, I think 7 or 8 months after he was forced to retire, he was dead. It was just gone. Like, no community, like people, I think we've had a very big focus on like the physical realm of body and health and like look good fitness and all these different industries and everything, but there's not as much of an emphasis on the psychological realm, you know, and even a lot of psychology and giving people drugs and kids with attention deficit disorder. To me, I hear a child, a Homo sapien that's supposed to run around and be in nature. Like, you're telling me you're going to diagnose him with something? Fuck you. That's what I think. Sorry if you can bleep me out if you need to. I don't know if you can curse on here, but it's like, it just makes me sick. Right. And that's just like another fiat, like machination that is trying to take this complexity of human nature, not having an ancestral understanding of it whatsoever, and then saying kids are supposed to sit in rows and be quiet for 8 hours a day because we modeled that after the Prussian system because we need workers and soldiers, right? Which is what the modern school system is based on, by the way. Do your research. And it's gross. It's just disgusting in every way. And a lot of kids go through that system, as myself, as one of them. And I had 2 ways to go. I could have gone out of it in a very bad way, down a very bad path. Because again, I was like an outcast. I was like high class. I always got in trouble. I always got referrals, like all that crap. I was able to kind of channel that energy into something growth-minded, productive. I got into self-help in my 20s, and like, it was like just massive for me. But it's like a lot of kids don't have that opportunity, or for whatever reason, something moves them in a different direction and they commit bad things, and bad things happen to them and others. And it's like, yeah, they're human. They have responsibility, but at the same time, like, they didn't choose where they were born. They didn't choose the teachers they had, the school they had. All these things are just like being passed around. It's just like meat sack. Like, you go here, you do this, you listen, you do that. And if you don't, you're less than. And if you don't, people are going to bully you. And if you don't, parents are going to be mad at you and teachers are going to be mad at you. And like, it's just gross. And it's another example of removing nature from humanity and doing these very weird things where you send kids off all day long with other strangers and other kids and whatever. And it's like, I mean, we're seeing more homeschooling than ever in the history of America. And that's good. That needs to rise.
Yeah.
Colin, I'm just curious, right? It's like you're so well researched and you have so many different angles of how you go about doing things. I think that there's probably a good argument that there would be a certain amount of people that would say, like, how do you stay positive when you're seeing so much darkness and so much broken shit going on in the world?
Yeah.
Like, how do you think about answering that and maybe just staying positive for yourself or your family? I don't know if it goes back to the reality creation, but just curious about that.
Yeah, it's hard because I wasn't on Twitter until like 2020, and I didn't know anything about it. Now I love it. But when I first got into it, I noticed things.
Yeah.
I noticed my mood. I noticed my desire to want to like call all these, I'm sorry, but all these leftists, I wanted to call them idiots. And I'm like, that's not productive. That's not good for them. It's not good for me. It's not doing anything. Right. And until this day, I still struggle with that. But what I did is I had to do a few things. I had to install a browser that blocked the sidebar because that would pull me into what's trending discussions. A lot of it was politics. Right. I even have to actively block people. Like, Twitter will literally serve me up blue check marks from people I don't follow because they've like figured out that I'm more likely to talk shit to them, which to them is engagement. Like I swear. And I'm like blocking people. I don't follow you. Why are you showing up? So the thing about what this tells me from a first principles perspective, which is what I've already kind of figured out with Instagram, because I've been on Instagram for a lot longer. If you don't control your use of social media will control you. Social media, or tech companies in general, hire some of the smartest people on the planet from all over. I mean, they'll give jobs to the Chinese, to everyone around the world, if they can help them better write algorithms and sell advertising, which is based on capturing your attention and holding it for as long as possible. We're talking about the smartest minds in the world with billions of dollars and resources that are trying to gamify your attention and prey on your human biases and dogma and tribalism so that they can sell your attention in whatever way they can get it. They don't care. Same thing with the media, same thing, right? It's all based on clicks now. So that they can sell that to advertisers, because advertisers pay per view or click. So the more attention, and I've done this, I've run Facebook ads accounts. I know how this works. More views, impressions equals more clicks, higher conversion rate, more money I give Facebook or Google or Twitter, right? The entire system is designed to monetize human nature, but not in a good way. You know, it's not like Twitter's saying like, we'll pay you to go outside and walk, take steps and do a workout or whatever. Like there's some apps and games trying to do this. And I think that kind of technology is very cool. But social media, the incentives are not there. They're not aligned with human well-being. They're aligned with monetary incentive.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to use it. You have to use a certain way. So that's a big one. And then the other thing is you just have to cultivate a growth mindset. And this is where we get back to the duality. I really feel for people that have never experienced death in their life of a loved one, because it is, I think it's the only thing that can give you a very deep understanding of how precious life is. Like, but even then, not everyone comes out of it. Some people come out of it broken. So like, and this is where nature and nurture comes in, and why I'm grateful to even be grateful. And now don't get me wrong, I get pissed at times, and I have lots and lots and lots of supplies in case society collapses, right? But I still don't think it's going to happen. I kind of went through that phase where like, do I need to become full-blown prepper? Do I need to get a bunker? You know, let me just do enough. Yeah. Bitcoin for me, like without Bitcoin, it would be like, I would have no faith in the future. I probably would like already be eyeing how to live on a small island somewhere and become self-sufficient. So I go to that extreme, but then I come back and I think and I focus on positivity. And also, this is huge. I think this can really help a lot of people. Study history. Look how bad it was. Like if you can compare how bad it was to what it is now, people have no idea. They have no nexus to understand the prosperity we live in. Like they need, like if we could all teleport to the medieval times and like live as a serf for a week, you come back to this time and just be like, nothing phases me. Like it's amazing, right? How fortunate we are. And this is all built on the backs of billions of humans, most of which aren't alive anymore. Some gave the sacrifice to fight in wars that allowed us to get to this point. Some create technologies that give us all this prosperity. We are the beneficiaries of so much death, destruction, and figuring shit out the hard way than any other humans in the history of Earth. And then in 100 years, it's going to be true for those people. In 100 years, it's going to be true for those people, right? So if you're alive, you're winning. That's kind of my core argument to all this like cancel culture victim bullshit. Like if you're alive, you're already the most privileged person in the history of the earth, right? And you're trying to compare yourself to someone else or whatever. It's a fool's errand. You shouldn't do it, right? There is so much to be grateful for, especially if you have your health. If you have your health, man, oh my God, you have it all. Like I would not trade my health for, you know, like Warren Buffett's wealth. Like a lot of people, they've done this thought experiment. Like, would you trade places with Warren Buffett if you could have his wealth? Would you become like 90 years old and be a billionaire? And almost nobody would say yes to that. So it's like, put that in perspective. Think about it. Why are you giving up so much life? Why are you sacrificing time with your family and your friends and all these things that matter because you're chasing some other external validation BS or whatever? It's like, it's just hard. Our environment, this goes back to the mismatch. Our environment is designed to monetize us, and the state is designed to turn us into debt slaves, tax-paying debt slaves that are not a threat to the state, which is also why they want to take your guns, right? So that we will be docile and we will create we will earn income that the state can then use towards its ends.
Hmm.
You're born into a country, you pay taxes your entire life, and then when you die, the death tax, most people don't, estate tax, they take a claim. It's like 50 to 75% of whatever you have. And people sign up and like, that's just the way it is. It's normal.
Yeah. So where does Bitcoin give you hope?
Oh man, Bitcoin gives me hope because it's the first time in human history that we have absolute scarcity. Okay, now I got to be pithy here because we could be like an hour just on this, right?
Yeah, right.
There is like, if I were to ask you how much gold is there on Earth, you could not tell me. If I would ask you how much real estate is there on Earth, you could not tell me. Or how much real estate is there going to be? I don't know. What if every city becomes a mile-high skyscraper? Mm-hmm. You cannot know the fixed amount of this thing, right? And when it comes to valuing an asset or something that has value, the scarcity is what matters. And when you know the scarcity, you can have a much truer calculation of its current value plus its long-term value. So for example, the Mona Lisa, you would pay, if you had the money and you want the Mona Lisa, you would pay millions of dollars for that, right? I don't think it's even for sale. But you would not pay for a copy of it. You would not pay $1 million for a copy, right? Scarcity, okay? So, and you could like do a million examples of that. The reason that Bitcoin is the first time we've had absolute scarcity is because all money, all commodity, all things in the history of humanity can either not be fully counted or cannot be controlled, and you cannot have confidence it would stay the same. We can always mine more gold. We can always mine more silver. Eventually we'll find asteroids that have it all or whatever, but we're never going to find an asteroid with Bitcoin on it. And there's a lot of reasons why this is, but basically the decentralized nature of Bitcoin and its immaculate conception of how it came to be, there's now this ecosystem of nodes, of miners, of holders that all kind of opt into this system that have created this thing that is truly decentralized, right? Decentralized means no one group or human or even nation state could shut it down. Mm-hmm. It's like the internet. If I were to tell you, because this is what a lot of people say, like, well, the government's going to ban Bitcoin. It's like, okay, the government could try to ban the internet. How successful do you think it would be? The cat's out of the bag. The internet is a truly decentralized thing. It will not be shut down. It will not be put back. Bitcoin is the same exact way because Bitcoin will always find a way. And every time you attack it, it'll get stronger, right? I have a node running in my office right here. Every single one of these nodes around the world makes the network more secure. Okay. Mm-hmm. I could have 10 of these. I could take 10 nodes right now. It's a Raspberry Pi, costs $300, right? And it runs the blockchain over and over again. I could take these and place them, I could in the dirt right there. I could put it in a bank vault. I could put it like in China, all over the world. That's part of the decentralized nature. There's no single attack vector, right? You can't just attack the Bitcoin network because you'd have to like kill all of humanity. Yeah. You know, and then you could like explore how the decentralized nature creates absolute scarcity, but it creates absolute scarcity because the code itself, which is enforced by all these nodes all around the world. To change it, you have to kill all the nodes, or at least get 51% of them, which is impossible. Then you could rewrite the code. But because you can't do that, the code stays constant. And what the code enforces is 21 million supply cap. We know how many have been mined thus far. It's about like 85 or 90% of them. Okay. And then we know the last year that the last block will be mined. So in 2140, all 21 million will have been released out to the network on the ledger, which is all it is. It just exists on a ledger, right? That is the first time in human history where you had something that you can know for sure that the supply is there and will stay that way because of the decentralized nature and all the different market actors. And like, there's a lot of game theory around it and all these different things. And the reason that gives me hope is because much of the problems with fiat food, fiat this, fiat everything, fiat culture is based on fiat money. The government controlling the money printer, because when the government can print unlimited dollars to do anything it wants, you get all the craziness in the world. You get exactly what's going on right now. You get people pretending men can get pregnant. You get like transgender this, transgender that, all this crazy nonsense. It's a result of not having feedback mechanisms, not having skin in the game. Nobody tracking whether politicians do anything like they say they're going to do, right? It's all just bullshit. It's all like they're literal actors. We hire actors that tell us lines that we probably know are fake or written by someone else. And then we don't even pay attention to whether they like do that thing or not, right? It's completely and utterly ridiculous, right? And when the world adopts this Bitcoin standard, because they understand that this is the first time no state can control it, because that's been the problem with every money, every commodity, even gold has been co-opted. Like JP Morgan's been fined billions of dollars for manipulating the price of gold, right? And you don't know how much there is, and you don't know how much there's going to be. This is the first time we have absolute scarcity. And when the world wakes up to that, it's going to be called hyper Bitcoinization, where you're going to have 8 billion humans that want to own as much Bitcoin as possible. And there's only 21 million of them. What that's going to do to the price, some say parabolic. Like literally overnight, right? For me, I wouldn't care if the price even like grew like an average 10% a year. I wouldn't care. I use it as my savings vehicle. I also use it as a way that I can protect myself from the state, because if the government came to right now, took all my assets, they would not get my Bitcoin. Why? Because my Bitcoin is self-custody, and it's literally it's a phrases in my head, a chain of words that I use to unlock my Bitcoin. So it's the first time in human history you can also cross borders with your economic value. Try crossing a border with a bar of gold or silver. You might get a few coins through. You're not getting $1 million or 100 million or 10 million or whatever, right? What this does is this disincentivizes violence, as Michael Saylor likes to say. Because if you go to invade a territory, why have countries invaded other countries since the dawn of time?
Resources.
If you can't get the resources because all the Bitcoin is just in people's heads, you now have to change your economic calculations on whether it's profitable to go to war, right? And the real thing that this benefits, the real people that this benefits, because it benefits Americans, yes, because we still have the money printer, we have the Fed printing up all this money, manipulating interest rates, all this bullshit. It benefits the poor farmer in Zimbabwe. Why? Because the rest of the world wants dollars, because their currencies are so crap that even to them, the dollar is like amazing. But every time the US prints money, what do? Through inflation, we steal the value from every dollar holder and earner on planet Earth, meaning that farmer in Zimbabwe is like, why every year do I have to work harder? But it feels like I'm actually sliding in the opposite direction. What people don't understand is that the US petrodollar and the Fed have enslaved humanity. And the government funds its operations at a deficit by stealing from all dollar holders and earners through inflation. Every time they make more of it so they can spend it, all of our purchasing power goes down. It's an indirect theft, but it is theft. It's just legalized theft. And they call it silent tax for that reason, because it's not the tax that you pay a bill for. And that's going to bring more empowerment to more humans than anything in my ever, probably. And in my life, this is the most exciting thing that I've ever seen. It's going to change the world.
Yeah. I'm in full agreement with everything you're saying, eating it up completely. I think it's the most beautiful creation in a lifetime. It's unbelievable to think that someone had the foresight to create a system like that.
Well, here's the thing though, but he took existing innovations,
right,
and he pieced them together. And then we can also take this back. The first hominids that figured out how to use fire to cook meat, and then they got better at hunting, and they did it more. We're all beneficiaries of that, right? So this idea of IP and trademark and my idea, it's mostly nonsense, because we are all, as Newton said, standing on the shoulders of giants. He took a couple things. There was one related to spam. I think it was Adam Beck that designed this, and he took that idea, and then he took some of the failed projects like digital bit gold or something. There's a couple other ones that failed. He took those ideas and he pieced it together. But at the same time, he was at the precipice of peer-to-peer, of the internet, of this thing that had grown to hit a certain critical mass that it could have only happened at that time, right? It's like that. That's what they say. Certain innovations happen when they're ready, when it's the right time, and then they take hold. And before then, it doesn't work, And that's what he was at. He was, again, he's a miracle. What he did is a miracle. It's amazing, but it's still what humanity did. I look at this as the invention of cultivating fire, or the wheel, or the steam engine. There might have been a guy that patented the steam engine, but we're talking about people tinkering and ideas and stuff getting passed around. And it's really humanity creating the steam engine, and humanity created the internet, even though it was DARPA, right? Because these people had to come to this point, these things had to converge, but then more importantly, they had to reach a certain adoption. The internet would have never taken hold if it didn't have a certain amount of adoption, because network effects, they got connect and they connect and they connect. There's a lot of laws around that. Same thing with silicone, Moore's law. These things had to converge at the right time. And he was the facilitator of bringing that to humanity.
I'm actually so pissed that I have to drop for another call, because I feel like we could talk a whole other hour about Bitcoin.
Oh, we can do other episodes. Yeah.
We got to do part 2 on just Bitcoin.
For sure. Yes, totally.
But it's even just hearing you talk about it, and I don't want to ramble too much, but it's I hear people like you talk about Bitcoin, and we've had some incredible Bitcoiners on the podcast. It's hear you speak about it, and it literally helps to give me hope for the future. It's the most optimistic community of people that I've ever met. And it's interesting how it pulls together so many different people with different backgrounds and disciplines, and that are all united behind the same common principle. So, well,
first principles thinkers, truly first principle thinkers, are optimists.
Yeah.
Because you cannot ignore history. You cannot ignore technology, innovation. You cannot ignore the fact that 98% of climate related deaths in the past 100 years, or the amount of climate related deaths in the past 100 years have gone from have dropped by 98%. So like Alex Epstein and moral case fossil fuels and all that, like a lot of the climate change narrative, I'm like, nonsense, right? I actually think probably pollution, microplastics and things like that are more of an issue that nobody talks about. Everyone talks about carbon. That's a whole other topic. But when you are a first principle thinker, you come to things like red meat is the perfect human food. It doesn't matter what some doctor tells me. Like I can't ignore that. It's the first principle. It's very simple to see. And then over time, it becomes obvious to you. Then over time, you become a little bit disillusioned because you're like, oh my gosh, humanity has so far to go, right? And so you do have to balance that because it is easy to become a pessimist. Like I go through these phases where sometimes I'm antisocial and I'm like, nobody understands anything. I don't want to be around people. I want to go like live in the woods and just do my own thing. And then like I get through that and then I get people together and I remember the magic of community and people and I do all these things, right? So it's like this constant ebb and flow. But it's like even just talking with people that are very smart, that I've known for years about Bitcoin, they're all in their different adoption curves of it and their understanding of it. And like we should never get frustrated by them being on a journey they're on. It's like me being frustrated or someone being frustrated with me like 10 years ago. Like when or maybe it was like 15, when I was doing like the bodybuilding thing and like eating sandwiches and pre-workouts and like doing all that crap. Like I had to learn that too, like, so.
Yeah. Colin, what's the best way for people to connect with you online, just to learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah, the Better Human newsletter is probably the best. I'm also on YouTube in the podcast, Better Human Podcast. The Better Human newsletter is thebetterhuman.co. I put out a free newsletter once a month, and then I have a paid weekly. And the podcast is Good Better Human. I'm on YouTube, Twitter. I think it's Sovereign Colin. I don't know. I keep changing my name a lot. I realize like I go on Twitter and I say a lot of things publicly. I don't really want it connected to my real name. So I like obfuscate my name a little bit because, it's one of these things. There are crazy people out there that can find you pretty easily if they wanted to. It's just an unfortunate thing. So I think like a little bit of digital privacy, hygiene, and protection is something we all need. I think in the coming years, it's going to become more of a topic, actually.
Yeah. Well, we both have personally gained a ton of knowledge just from listening to your podcast the last month or so. So we just really appreciate
that a lot.
The content that you're putting out, and would love to link up with you in person in Austin and just continue.
Yeah, let me know, man. Anytime. You got my number.
Let's do it. Also, I'm pumped for what you and Brian are building over on East Austin. We'll have to,
you got to come and help us build. We're going to do a lot of crowdsourced, like community building shit. We're going to build a deck, the barbecue area, install the ice baths and the saunas and everything.
I love it.
It's going to be great.
Beautiful. Well, Colin, thanks a lot for your time today, man. This was awesome.
Yep. Let me know when it goes live. I'll share it. Appreciate it, guys.
Good. Appreciate it.